It has finally arrived, Christopher Nolan's conclusion to his rather epic Batman trilogy. And hopefully this will be the conclusion, and we will not be getting any more, at least, Batman films for a couple of years, and we will not be getting any more Christopher Nolan Batman films. Because Christopher Nolan has dignity, and he will not try and milk a franchise to death, unlike The Amazing Spider-Man, which was rubbish. It's been 8 years since the events of The Dark Knight, and essentially there's been very little for our vigilante hero to do because of the Dent Act. But the real reason that we have no more Bruce Wayne appearances or no more Batman is because Bruce Wayne is in Wayne Manor, still mourning at the loss of his actions and how that brought about the death of Rachel Dawson. But with the very beginning of the film, we know that Bane is coming to Gotham for its reckoning. And as the film goes along, we learn that Bruce Wayne has to rise back up to Batman, then fall, then rise back up to Batman to try and defeat Bane. And that's about all I can say without spoiling it. With Nolan signing off on the Batman films, we've been kind of saying that it seems like an end to a certain type of blockbuster and a certain type of superhero film, and it'll be the film that we look back on to say this is how you do a blockbuster, this is how you do a superhero film, when all sort of superhero films and blockbusters begin to dry up on originality and on scope and on what you can actually tease out of the material. Nolan's Batman films, they've essentially been blockbusters with brains, and in those terms they're probably the best of their kind. And they've also been modern day crime dramas that just so happen to have Batman in them. But with The Dark Knight Rises, it's essentially more comic book, less crime drama, but it still retains its intelligence. And it's that intelligence which made such a difference to the comic book genre in terms of what Nolan did with Batman and what made it so relevant and compelling. But with The Dark Knight Rises, it seems that Nolan wants to get across so much, because this is his final installment, that essentially there doesn't become one clear strand of thought that is at all well developed. It just seems like a lot of ideas that are thrown at the screen. Some stick and some don't. With Nolan's Batman films, he's made his villains use modern day fears to get at the heart of society, because that's what we would fear the most in a modern day society. With the first film, we had chemical warfare, which was really relevant with the Iraq War. Then we had the second film, which was the modern day terrorist, which seems even more chillingly relevant with the Colorado shootings. And then we have the third film, which involves Bane, who I believe is trying to incite revolution among the streets. But the one good thing to say about Bane, or at least what Nolan uses Bane for, is to show that Gotham is ripping itself apart. It's Bane implementing an idea into society that doesn't necessarily entail violence, but the Gotham City makes it that way, and essentially they begin to tear themselves apart before Batman comes back. And I get back to my previous point of essentially Nolan wanting to have so many things that it essentially becomes overstuffed. What Nolan uses Bane for is compelling, it's good, and if that's the clear thought and strain of the film that he wanted to get across, then success. But I still have doubt on what the real motive behind Bane was. Was it to incite revolution? Was it that he was just being used as a puppet? Was it for love? Was it just so we wanted to see the world burn? Was it because of money and the Wall Street crash? We don't really know. And the reason why we can't really understand is because Nolan tries and tackles all those issues, and none of them are particularly well developed. And two, we can't understand a thing that Tom Hardy says. And the problem with that isn't Tom Hardy himself, it's that goddamn mask. Why? Because we can't see his mouth. If we can't see people's mouths, we can't understand them properly. With The Dark Knight Rises, it's essentially less Batman and a lot more Bruce Wayne. And that's interesting in theory. That's interesting to have Bruce Wayne behind the mask tackling his own demons, and that he can't be Batman anymore. But we've had that story before. We've had it in Spider-Man 2 and countless others. And I would have to steal something from a very good critic called Cosmo Landsman, who's one of the only critics I actually like reading, and I read him every week. And he doesn't like Batman, and he doesn't like Christopher Nolan, but he's not as bigoted, say, as Christopher Tukey or as Rex Reed. He's actually got very valid points to say about Christopher Nolan, and of course about the Batman films in general. And he was stating that the interesting thing about Bruce Wayne and Batman was that he was essentially his own worst enemy. He was battling his own demons, and it was a psychological thing, and it made Batman as a character very compelling. In the first film, of course, it was his own fears that he had to tackle over what happened to him as a child. When it came to The Dark Knight, it was essentially emotional problems more than psychological, with him falling in love with Rachel Dawson and that Batman was no longer needed. The Dark Knight Rises, it's kind of just thrown away. It's just physical presence, and it's just no more psychological depth. It's just battling out bad back, let's try and rise up, then fall and see that we can't be Batman anymore, and rise again and fix our back again. It's pretty standard stuff, and it doesn't make for that compelling of a character, seeming that he's on screen a lot. And that's the problem with Bane as well, that he's a character who just feels that he's there to beat Batman all the way down to Chinatown. That's about it. And it's a shame because you could have used Bane for so much more, and yet the film doesn't. Even though it doesn't work as well as its predecessor, it's still pretty damn good entertainment. All of the ingredients which made the action scenes so good in The Dark Knight are back, all the gadgets are back, and even more in the form of Anne Hathaway's Selina Kyle, who is cunning, sexy, intelligent, and is essentially this film's the Joker. And it seems like Nolan has been honing his skills and practicing and perfecting everything that he can do to give us this one massive epic spectacle of action and entertainment. I will not deny that when we have the chase with Bane on the bikes, that was incredibly thrilling, and I will not deny that. And that's where the film works at its best. But if you want even more, I could say that the film has emotional depth, which I wasn't expecting to see after Inception, which I didn't like because it didn't have any of that. But I was incredibly wrong. In fact, Nolan has created characters we can care for. He has created characters who have history and who we feel like we've gone on a journey with. It does have an emotional high point, especially with Alfred and Bruce Wayne. That's when it gets at its very, very best, and that's when we see what Nolan can do. But even with all of that, it still, for some reason, feels like a compromise, just having all of that spectacle in the same way as Inception, but without the ideas behind it. It still works better than any action movie we've seen this summer, and by the terms in which we judge a blockbuster, that is essentially all we need to know. But by the terms in which we judge a Christopher Nolan blockbuster, it doesn't quite work. And as everyone has been saying, you should just go and see it, down to the fact that one day you can say you were there and you saw every single Batman film in the cinema. So if you think my points aren't particularly valid, you can comment on below, and of course I will reply back and we can get into a much heated argument, because that's all the comments on film reviews on YouTube are for.